in the UK, and today she's going to be talking about how she teaches Boolean algebra to her grade 12 classes. So welcome, Genevieve, and over to you.
Yeah, it was one of the difficult subjects that I found, mainly because of the lack of resources for the level. I only started teaching A-level at Sussex Downs College in September, and the head of computing suggested I taught it because it's kind of a challenging subject, and he thought I'd be really good at it, even though it's kind of not my area of expertise. So I spent hours and hours and hours trying to find resources, and obviously there are some for the exam board, but they have a particular book, but it's only over 2 pages, and it's too condensed for anyone to kind of fully understand. So you have to go through it and break it down quite slowly. So I started with very simple kind of truth tables, then logic gates. Then it moves on to kind of De Morgan's law and the simplification of Boolean algebra. So I've created all of these resources, which I'm kind of going to go through at rocket speed, because nobody wants to sit there and watch a presentation of millions of slides about kind of the difficulties that I had. And even now, some of the students still find it difficult because of the difference in notation between exam boards and different countries. So when you're looking to revise, you might have one symbol in one country and a completely different symbol in another. So that's a bit of a challenge in terms of actually knowing what you're looking at, which is why I've taught my students every possible permutation, really, that they can come up with. So I'll just screen share the kind of part of one of the PDFs that we're going to share at the end of this. And I'll go through some parts of it and fast forward others. So first of all, it's kind of just showing you the very simple kind of what a gate looks like, the notation that's required for the exam board, and then an example. So it goes through, most of them look like this, and you'll see that there's a section header for the actual logic gates. And then prior to this, we did the truth tables. So what I did when I was doing this, and the highlighted bit here that I'm talking about, is it's this notation here with the tildes is very different to what the exam board use. They use a bar across the top, but and also if you're in the States, they'll use like an apostrophe for this negation or this not gate, this not version. So it's very difficult when you're trying to teach and you've got some really, really good resources, but they're actually from a different country or a completely different level. It was very difficult to actually sort of narrow down what was required just for grade 12 without it being too simple and without them not understanding fully if they needed to go and research it themselves. So as you can see, most of it is fairly straightforward. It's just this, as you can see here, this is the notation, this A here with the bar across the top is the notation in the exam board. So that's what they found quite difficult, is that the notation's very different in terms of what they have to write in the exam, and also trying to use this on a computer. It's quite difficult to write a bar across the top. And also the and the or, when you manually write it, is kind of like an upside down V or a V. So, and then this symbol here for the exclusive OR gate. Again, they found it quite difficult when they were trying to do it on a computer to actually use this particular symbol, because they had to insert it all the time. So there's little things when you're trying to do specific work on the computer, it's easier sometimes to come off and do it handwritten and then allow them to use a different notation on the computer that they're more comfortable with, but which is why you have to teach them every possible notation, which I found quite difficult. And I spent lots and lots of time and generally lots of late nights trying to explain it to them. So another thing I get them to do, which is quite useful, is to actually explain, just as the task shown you here, is get them to do a very short video explaining, say, one gate or one kind of very simple element of it. And it's very quick to see whether they've got the full understanding. Certainly if you set the video to be a resource for new students. So already they have to make sure that they've presented the actual information correctly, that they've spoke in a way that everybody can understand, and that it's clear what they're trying to explain. And what happened was, a lot of the time when they were doing the NOT gates, they were having extra inputs and outputs, or it wouldn't be clear what notation they were using. They'd flip between different notations and things like that. So that was a really good technique to use. So but obviously they were a bit embarrassed. They didn't want to share them. But so I'm going to get them to do some without them on the actual videos, and then they can then we'll be able to share them. So they're not physically on it. They're quite happy to share them. But if they are, they didn't really want to share them, which is fair enough. And then this is the most difficult part of all of it. This kind of De Morgan's law, which basically means that one kind of sort of equation is equivalent to another, and it's really for allowing reduced costs in circuitry for kind of CPUs and things like that. So that's kind of, they kind of have to get their head around that, and this is the one that they tend to sort of struggle a little bit with. But we've gone through lots of different things with them in order to kind of improve that. So one of the things that I've done is actually created a workbook for them to go through, which starts off with very, very simple kind of equations and things like that. And I'll just quickly flip to that one. So with the workbook, it's designed so that they can work through it themselves. There's lots of links in there. And obviously this is designed specifically for UK students in terms of the notation, etc., and things like that. So if anyone else is using it, just be aware that the notation is very kind of UK based. So I'll just put it up. So are we on the right one? So here you can see, I'll just show you the front page, so I do it very slowly. So I always make sure that they kind of have the rules here. I've also made sure that they've learnt more rules than the exam board require. I think there's 5 that they state that they need to understand, and it's actually out of the 34 rules in terms of simplifying Boolean algebra, there's about 17 that help you actually understand it, or 15. So if you know 15, it becomes more pattern recognition than actually kind of understanding it. And some of the developers I know have said, like at Unity 3D, said actually that pattern recognition is really good. If you can remember it that way, then that's fine. So don't worry necessarily whether you kind of can remember it. And then there's some really, really helpful websites that I've put on here, which are links. And then what I make them do as well is, as you can see here, the notation has the tildes and stuff, which isn't the exam board notation. So I always make them rewrite the notation all over again. And then we go from very simple kind of expressions. So you turn in the word into the actual numeric one, just to start them off, because obviously it's quite, when you want them to understand things, it's always good to give them something that they'll achieve straight away. So that kind of quick goal for most students, especially the ones that are struggling, they can do lots of questions and get quite good and good results with that first bit. And then again, doing lots of visual stuff before we get into any of the actual simplifying and the difficulties that they get in terms of doing the expressions. So I always kind of give them one to do, and I always, can you see, I always make sure that the law is attached to when I've done the description, and you can see next to it here is there's the expansion of it. So it helps them straight away in terms of doing it. So these are the rules that kind of they've gone through for simplifying F. And again, this could be anything. I tend to give them different letters as well. So I've set this particular task, and I've actually given J and H and K and I, and when I did it with A and B, they got it straight away, and when I did it with K and J, they didn't get it. So it's a really good technique to modify, even using the exact same questions in the same lesson, but with different letters, because sometimes they're X, Y, and V, or X, Y, and Z. So it's quite good to give them different letters, and they said actually doing that really helped them make sure that they got the correct technique. Even though it was exactly the same question, it just had a different letter. And they just said visually it looked totally different because all the B's look nice and round and friendly. This is how they described it. And the kind of X and Y's and Z's don't look that friendly, which is kind of nice. But, so obviously we go with the unfriendly ones more often now. than we do with the friendly ones. So you can see here again, I've written the 13 rules that really help them understand. So as soon as they see this, they know it's going to be an A. The one that they find really difficult is this. Sorry, is this one, this distributed one. So basically, you have it ends up being that they distribute A, sort of B and C over A, which is this first part here, because it's flipped around the other side. So it makes it very difficult for them, that they end up having an added one, and they don't really get why they've got an extra one. And it's because you're separating them out to distribute them over A, to allow you to simplify it, and in some senses get rid of it. But it's very hard for them to understand that one. That's the one that we have a little bit of a challenge with, as well as the De Morgan's law. Really, that's the sort of errors that they have faced with challenges. A really good way is, if you just get back to the picture of the gates as well, is actually kind of getting them to write the gates out and then drawing a simplified version, and then making them write the expressions on each point where you can see where the arrows are, so that they can then, so they make really, really complicated gates. So you can give them the same equations that you did, and then make them draw a gate. Even if you've got, like, on the other picture, I've actually got printed out images of each gate, and then they just use kind of a whiteboard underneath it, or they just, in order to be able to write the kind of equation as they go along. And I've found that that's quite helpful for, obviously, because everyone's a different type of learner. Now, there's a really big problem in terms of the exam board, is that you're not allowed to use truth tables to simplify Boolean expressions, which is quite, which a lot of students find one of the best ways to help them understand kind of each element of the equation. So it's very difficult when they're trying to simplify something and they're not allowed to use one particular element because of an exam board restriction. It's like, for some of my colleagues in different schools use Carnot maps, and again, then I don't know whether they're not allowed, but they're not on the syllabus. But that's the only way that they can simplify them. You know, and everyone's got their own little kind of quirky technique. And obviously, the difficulty is that if they use a truth table, they can lose marks. So there is a difficulty in that when you're teaching, which is why I've gone through this more pattern recognition version of teaching Boolean algebra. And it's one of the things that we come back to. I throw a question in now and again as a starter, which they hate because they think it's over and done with now. And I'm like, well, if you're doing maths, it will come up in maths. You just haven't done it yet. So that's one of the challenges that the students face, because obviously it's really, really important for secretary design and any of those things in terms of how computers work, etc. But it's one of the, and it's only a small element of the exam, but it's one of the ones that they find most challenging, mainly because there isn't anything done like this even at secondary schools. It will be the first time that they will have seen something like this. And so, because I went and spoke to my maths department in the secondary school I worked at and asked them whether they did truth tables or decision tables, and they said no. And I was, and obviously when you're doing GCSE computing, let alone A-level, which is sort of grade 10 and 11, you have to do the same thing with them, just not quite as not quite at the level. There's no De Morgan's law, but there's all of the logic gates and some very simple expressions, but there's never more than any sort of 2 or 3 inputs at GCSE, but there is between 3 and 5 when you're at A-level, sometimes more, depending if they've got a challenging question. So that's kind of one of the ways that we kind of go through the teaching, and it is difficult for the students to understand. There is some very good videos available online, but again, it's difficult when you're mixing up your notations to make sure that they're the best ones. And again, they take it one level too high because they're all designed for degree level. So, and I'll just take the screen share off. Yeah, so in terms of actually kind of delivering it, there's a really good document about which some 3 professors in different universities across Asia did about using Scratch to teach De Morgan's law. Now, I use Scratch quite a lot, even in any of my courses, and it's really good for teaching this kind of Boolean logic, the kind of, have you clicked your mouse, yes or no, even at a very sort of primary level for a sort of little quiz. And then you can take, it's quite useful, things like Pac-Man is a brilliant game in computing for many different reasons. For example, the ghosts, you can turn into a finite state machine. You can code it to be a finite state machine, or you can take the principles of De Morgan's law and use that in the whole programming of the Pac-Man game. And there is a document that I'll share at the end of this, which goes through how that's really good. And by using things that they're not struggling with, which is things like Scratch, because it takes away the kind of fear of coding it. Is if you were going to use either Java or Python, it's very kind of text-based, it looks a bit scary, there's no pretty pictures. You actually can just focus very much on the concepts and the actual understanding, and they can see where they've gone wrong. It doesn't necessarily show this sort of object-oriented hierarchy, which you'd like, which some of the other languages do later on, but in terms of the concepts that you're looking at and focusing on, that is actually really, really useful in terms of teaching specifically Boolean algebra and De Morgan's law. It is a bit of a challenge. It was certainly many, many nights at 2 o'clock in the morning going, oh my God. Because it's all right understanding it yourself, but understanding it to teach somebody else is a very, very different principle. This is what I'm trying to explain to some of the developers and some of my friends who actually aren't teachers. And they go, yeah, I get that. I'm like, okay, then teach me. And they're going, well, I can't do that. I'm like, well, yes, exactly. I need some help. It's really good, though. There will be some actual really videos designed for A-level, because I'm working with a professor from Brighton University and a professor from Cambridge to actually create these mathematical computer science principle videos specifically aimed at kind of GCSE and A-level, so that we don't have to spend hours and hours and hours at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to prepare lessons that can be a bit of a struggle. So, but yeah, other than that, it's been really well in using the sort of physical elements of teaching and the sort of Scratch have really helped improve the students' understanding. So it's quite good to use things like Scratch and Greenfoot to help you do actual quite complex and abstract elements of computer science theory. Yes, so I'm done.
Cool. Well, thank you very much, Genevieve. I think that's really great of you to share those resources that you've built, and we'll post them on the Google+ Google in Education page underneath the video later on today. And I think hopefully that will help some of the other teachers facing the same challenges to overcome them. I think we're meeting you again next week or the week after for another session. So which I think is about using Greenfoot. Yes.
Yeah. So I'll show. Yeah, they've already got some really good resources on there specifically for computer science, which is really good. And they hit the A-level curriculum, which is brilliant as well. So.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll be back I think next week with Genevieve, and you can learn more about Greenfoot and look out on the Google+ page for the resources. This recording is also held at youtube.com/edu@google. So have a nice day, everybody, and see you next time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.